afternoon from Los Angeles, and welcome to Stock Market Today, sponsored by Interactive Brokers. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at 3 stocks, including Federal Signal and Costco. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. It's Alyssa Coram here, joined by Justin Nielsen today. And Justin, it looks like we were able to climb back into positive territory by the end of the day. The S&P closing up about 0.3%, the Nasdaq up almost 0.2%, the Dow also in positive territory. So it looks like we're developing a little bit of a trading range here.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a lot of back and forth action. On Monday, Ed and I were talking about how it's kind of almost like they're trading punches back and forth, the buyers and the sellers. And that's been continuing for most of this week. You kind of see an up day followed by a down day. Now, the one thing that the sellers do have to their advantage is that there has been a little bit more volume on the downside. So the fact that we were kind of able to rally up a little bit today, it looked like it was going to be flat for most of the day, but it was able to close into positive territory. The one thing that we have been missing, though, is volume on the buying side. Now, one other thing, as you look at this chart that you might notice, is the highs have been coming in lower. Okay, so that's not a good thing. But the lows have been coming in higher. So what you're getting is you're kind of getting this angling of both, and that will set up an inflection point, and it's going to have to break one way or the other. So at this point, it's still very range bound, so we'll see which way it goes.
Yeah, we definitely will. Thanks so much for that technical insight there, Justin. All right, let's take a look at a few individual names, starting off with Store Capital, testing a new buy point here. This has just been a very steady gainer for over a year and a half now. It looks like just forming base after base after base, and this is just the latest one for Store Capital, and it's a REIT, which we don't typically talk too much about REITs.
We don't typically, but sometimes you have to go where the strength is.
Right.
And we have been seeing a lot of REITs looking very interesting lately. REITs, of course, that stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. So a lot of people are playing this more as an income play. So for example, with Store Capital, the store stands for Single Tenant Operational Real Estate, and what they do is they are involved with net leases where they're taking properties. They do a net lease which is more focused on income, and the tenant is kind of responsible for more of the insurance, the maintenance, the taxes, things like that. So it has a very healthy dividend. That yield is about 3.6% annually, and that's kind of what you typically will see with REITs, that higher level of dividend, again, more of an income play. But again, we have been seeing this, a lot of REITs kind of popping up on our screen. So it's definitely worth taking a look at some of these. Now, this does have earnings coming up on October 31st, but as you can see, it's a nice little base pattern here, and the relative strength has been holding up very well.
Right, and the entire base has taken shape above that 50-day line,
it's
which
getting support
seems pretty
right
strong.
There. Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, and moving on, let's take a look at Federal Signal. Ticker there is FSS, forming a base-on-base pattern, and it looks like even before the stock is testing new highs, that relative strength line is hitting a new high.
And that's one of the things that you see a lot of times with these base on bases. A lot of times the way that they're being formed is because the market indexes are having trouble getting to new highs. That's putting some pressure on stocks, but these are the ones that are trying to buck the trend. They're the ones that are trying to hold up, whereas we're seeing a lot of breakdown in software stocks and those former leaders. When you start looking at the ones that are holding up well, like Federal Signal, they do tend to have that bigger relative strength, that higher relative strength, and you see that in the relative strength line. So these are, again, things that you should be keeping your eye on. Of course, like with Store Capital, this is more what you would kind of say on the defensive side, the slower, pokey stocks. This is the reason why Federal Signal kind of works, is they're into vacuum excavation. So this is like your sewer cleaners and street sweepers, things like that. So this is stuff that's being purchased by governments and municipalities. So that tends to be a little bit more stable because they always need their street cleaners.
That's right. I just passed one the other day on my street, on my commute. And this also has earnings coming up right around the corner here.
Yeah, October 31st.
Could be a potential catalyst. Last quarter, we did see a pretty big gap up after the results.
And strong numbers here. It does have strong numbers. This is on the thinner side, however. So that's one thing to just be aware of. Its average daily volume is around 400,000, and this is a stock that's in the 30s. So that is a little bit lower in terms of the average daily dollar volume that we usually like to see. We usually like to see over 20 million.
Right.
And you get that by multiplying your average daily volume by the stock price.
That's right. And last but not least, let's check in on Costco because it's forming another base and trying to climb up the right side of that base. But it looks like maybe a handle could potentially be forming here for Costco. And earnings are out of the way.
Yes, earnings are out of the way on this one, which is one of the things that's kind of nice. You don't have to worry about that event coming up. This is a stock that we've had on leaderboard as a full position, and we actually had it on Swing Trader as a shorter term play. You can kind of handle these differently. So for a swing trader, we kind of rode it on the way up, and as it hit this former resistance, we started to back away from it because we had it on for quite a while. But for leaderboard, it still makes sense because this is just kind of forming a base. We still are up on that position, and what we're seeing right now, this is very shallow, so it's shallow enough to be a flat base, but it does have kind of a cup shape to it. So what we're seeing right now is a little bit of a pullback here, very low volume on this pullback, which we like to see. That's kind of like a handle. So if this can kind of right itself from here, and the retail tends to be an area right now.
Right, a pocket of strength.
Yeah, where there's a lot of strength and very select components there.
Right, exactly. Costco, Walmart also looking nicely here. So it's good to see other names in the group that are strong as well.
And it's kind of a reminder that you don't always have to go for those high octane tech,
Right, these are the growth rates are slower given the nature of the business and how big they are, but good.
Sometimes that's a better thing.
Exactly.
That slow, pokey growth can be better in an environment where it's a little uncertain.
That is very true. Well, that wraps it up for today. But before we go, want to remind you that we will have a new episode of the Investing with IBD podcast out tomorrow. We have a new episode out every Thursday. So make sure you're keeping tabs on investors.com/podcast for that. This week's guest is Joe Fahmy. So it's set to be another good one. Again, make sure you're keeping tabs on investors.com/podcast. And in case you missed it, we did have another episode of our investing strategy show out this week. And we were able to speak to Invesco about their TAN ETF, which is actually one of the ones that when you were on the show that we went over. So make sure you check that out at investors.com/investing strategies. That's it for today. Thanks once again for joining us, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow, everyone.